Welcome to Thinking in Psychiatry, an Academy by Psychiatry podcast, where we distill new research, translate evidence into practice, and support clinical decision-making for busy clinicians. I'm Dr. Sunil Rege, consultant psychiatrist and content curator at the Academy by Psychiatry. Today, I'm going to take you through a fascinating paper published in the 2025 Neuron journal. This perspective piece is titled The How and Why of Sleep, Motor Theory and Catecholamine Hypothesis by Ma and Dan. It's basic science, a lot of it rodent circuit work, but it goes straight to two questions that sit underneath a lot of what we see clinically. How is sleep controlled in the brain? And why does sleep loss ripple into mood, cognition, cardiometabolic risk, and neurodegeneration? The authors argue that our older single sleep center story is too narrow. Instead, they propose, 1, a motor theory of sleep, is that sleep control is embedded within the same circuits that regulate somatic and autonomic motor activity. And 2, a catecholamine hypothesis, a core biological function of sleep, is to stand down catecholamine signaling, dopamine, noradrenaline, adrenaline. Together, it's a more integrated way of thinking about insomnia, hyperarousal, and the systemic fallout of chronic sleep disruption. So let's check it out. Firstly, what kind of paper is this? This is not a clinical trial. It's a conceptual synthesis based on a decade of circuit-level neuroscience using tools like optogenetics, chemogenetics, and activity-dependent labeling. So the paper does two things. First, it maps where sleep neurons actually are and finds them scattered across the brain, often inside motor and autonomic circuits. Second, it proposes a reason sleep is biologically necessary by allowing catecholamine systems to inactivate and recover. So this is a mechanistic framework. Its value is how it reorganizes our thinking models. So let's start off with the how question. Sleep isn't one switch, it's distributed. The authors use a practical definition. They talk about sleep-promoting neurons and sleep-active neurons. Sleep-promoting neurons, if you activate them, sleep increases. If you silence them, sleep drops. Sleep-active neurons, they fire preferentially around sleep onset or during sleep. So sleep-promoting neurons, sleep-active neurons. Using connection tracing and activity tagging approaches, they show that sleep-active and sleep-promoting populations aren't confined to the preoptic area. They turn up across forebrain, midbrain, and hindbrain, and a striking number are located in systems we usually label as motor. These systems include the central autonomic network, the one that mediates blood pressure, heart rate, breathing, temperature, and the somatic motor systems. So this is the autonomic motor system and the somatic motor system, as the authors highlight. So based on brain-wide screens, the pattern is hard to ignore. Sleep control is embedded within the circuitry that regulates movement and internal organ state. So according to the motor theory, this is the first key reframing. We usually teach sleep as a sleep-wake switch. The preoptic area inhibits wake-promoting nuclear and sleep happens. Ma and Dan don't discard that, but they argue it's incomplete. Their view is that sleep is a global motor state transition. Somatic motor quiet, less movement, reduced muscle tone. Autonomic downshifting, lower heart rate, blood pressure, respiratory rate, core temperature. And the circuits controlling these changes contain genuine non-REM promoting neurons, the deep sleep promoting neurons. So motor structures are part of the sleep machinery. That matters clinically because it makes sleep disruption look less like a mysterious failure to initiate sleep, but more like a failure of multiple motor autonomic systems to disengage. Second, the catecholamine hypothesis, and this is where we come to the question, why sleep matters. Once sleep is framed as we did as a motor downshift, the why becomes clearer in this model. They propose that a central function of sleep is catecholamine inactivation, dopamine, noradrenaline, adrenaline reduction, which simultaneously reduces arousal and motor output, allows immune, metabolic, and synaptic systems to reset, and protects catecholamine neurons, which are metabolically demanding and vulnerable to stress. So they argue that catecholamine stand-down fits 3 useful clinical aspects. First, catecholamines sustain wakefulness and mobilization. If these systems don't reduce, sleep becomes difficult. 2, catecholamines shape multiple body systems. When catecholamine tone stays high, we don't just get insomnia, we get cognitive dysfunction, emotional volatility, immune dysfunction, metabolic dysfunction. Third, catecholamine neurons are costly to run in terms of energy. So regular off periods may be protective. Chronic overdrive may contribute to vulnerability in neurodegenerative disease. This is really fascinating when we take a step back and think about it. This is the function of sleep, why we sleep, a protective mechanism. They also describe feedback from glia, immune mediators, and metabolic state back onto catecholamine neurons. So in this frame, sleep is not just passive downtime. It's a coordinated period where catecholamine-driven mobilization reduces so that restoration can occur. So let's bring this together from a clinical perspective. The motor theory tells us where sleep control lives. It lives inside circuits that govern movement and autonomic regulation. So the key reframe is that it's not just a single area, but it's actually linked to circuits that govern movement and autonomic regulation. Second, the catecholamine hypothesis tells us why sleep is restorative. So this gives us a way to conceptualize common clinical patterns. Insomnia starts to look more like a persistent activation of motor, autonomic, and catecholamine systems, not simply difficulty initiating sleep. Second, hypersomnia and fatigue states can look like difficulty reactivating those systems or compensation for chronic overuse and incomplete restoration. So fascinating findings, but a word of caution. I'll discuss the limitations very briefly. This is largely rodent mechanistic neuroscience. So translation to humans is indirect. And they also state that the catecholamine hypothesis is plausible, but not proven. So let me bring all of this together and let's cover clinical pearls and takeaways. Pearl 1, sleep control is not one switch. It's distributed across autonomic and somatic motor networks, which explains why sleep disruption seems to be transdiagnostic, showing up across so many conditions, from dysautonomia to basal ganglia disease and, of course, psychiatric disorders. Pearl 2, when we see insomnia with persistent fight or flight physiology, PTSD, trauma-related disorders, it's reasonable to conceptualize it as a failure of motor autonomic circuits to disengage, not simply a failure of sleep drive. Pearl 3, catecholamine downregulation provides a coherent bridge between sleep loss and what we see clinically. Cognitive emotional dysregulation, immune imbalance, metabolic disturbance, all going hand in hand. The decision-making takeaway is to move away from thinking of sleep as a passive downtime controlled by a single center to seeing it as an active state transition operated globally throughout the brain, involving motor autonomic networks and catecholamine biology. And this is important because that's what we need to protect and, where possible, normalize. Thanks for listening. You can find links to the paper and related Academy modules, especially the sleep modules by Dr. David Cunnington, the Neuropsychiatry of Sleep, and the ADHD and Sleep Orders. You can find these on your dashboard. I'm Dr. Sunil Regge, and this is Thinking in Psychiatry, where how we think is just as important as what we prescribe. Until next time, keep thinking carefully and keep thinking clinically. Bye-bye.